Leverage, leverage, Turl told himself as he went through company papers in his office. He must solve this riddle of Nymph. With enough on the planetary director, Turl could begin his own project in earnest. Wealth and power on home planet beckoned from the future. Only Nymph could drop a mind bucket on him, and Turl was determined that once his project was completed, he was not going to spend 10 more years on this cursed planet. With enough on Nymph, all he had to do was finish the project, obliterate all evidence, including the animals, of course, get his employment terminated, and there he'd be, wallowing in luxury at home. But Nymph was getting a little restive. In the last interview a couple of days ago, Nymph had complained of the noise of the recon drone in his daily pass-by. And veiling as a sort of a compliment, he noted that the mutiny was not showing up on his lines. There was something on Nymph. Turl was fervently certain of it. He was thumbing through a company publication, Metal Markets of the Galaxies, which was issued several times a year. It was supposed to go to the sales department, but there was none of those on this planet, since it sent its order directly to home planet and had no sales, except to the home company. Yet the publication was sent routinely to all mine sites throughout the galaxies, and Turl had fished its latest copy out of the incoming dispatch box. So many credits for this metal and so many credits for another. Such and such credits for unsmelted or what percent, and was very, very dull. But Turl had laboriously went through it, hopeful of some clue. From time to time he would watch his live screens, keeping check on the animal. The button camera around its neck was working quite well, and in the vicinity of the cage and nearby plateau he had a broader view. It was a test to see whether the animal was really going to behave. The control box that monitored the cameras lay handy on Turl's littered desk. The animal so far had been very well behaved. Turl was struck by its orderly sense of priorities. It had somehow managed to turn the wounded horse over, get the packs off it. It had gotten some pitch from a tree and sealed the wound. It must have been effective, for the horse was now stumbling around on shaky legs, a little bit dazed, but munching at the tall grass. The animal had then staked out the other 3 horses, using a plated type of rope that had come from the packs. One particular horse tried to follow the man-thing around, nudging with its nose. It struck Turl very odd that the man-thing talked to it, that the man-thing had also talked to the wounded horse. Very peculiar indeed. Turl couldn't understand the language and listened intently to see whether the horses talked back. Maybe they did. Supersonic? They must say something, because the man-thing, well, he answered them sometimes. Was it a different tongue than the man-thing used to the 2 female creatures? Turl guessed there might be several such languages. Well, it was of no matter and not important. He was no chinko, he decided. He had such contempt for all races. Turl had next been distracted by the screen views of the animal when it mounted up on a horse and went down to the work area. From what he could see via the button camera, the animal wore around his neck. The silo workman ignored him. After a brief glance, the machines went right on by, tearing around as always. The man-thing rode up to Kerr. Turl got very interested and turned up the volume. Kerr tried to edge away. The animal said something peculiar. "It's not your fault." Kerr stopped, backing up. Kerr, not Turl. Kerr stopped, backing up. He looked confused. "I forgive you," said the animal. Kerr just stood there staring. Turl couldn't get a very good look at Kerr due to the shadows of the dome. But it seemed to Turl that Kerr looked relieved. Turl took careful note of that sort of trick. It was not the kind of behavior he had ever thought about. And then Turl really was startled. The animal borrowed a blade machine from Kerr. Char came over and objected, and Kerr just waved him off. The animal tied the horse to trail after the machine and drove the vehicle back up to the plateau. Kerr had looked positively threatening at Char. Had the animal started a fight between the 2 silos? How had the animal managed that? Well, thought Turl, he was just imagining things perhaps, and the screen views had been very jumpy, and the sound was flawed due to the roar of the machinery. And Turl went back to the real puzzle of Nymph. The next time Turl remembered to check, he saw that the animal had used the blade machine to knock down a half-dozen trees, and then he piled them up near the cage. It was using the blade controls to axe the trees in length. Turl was pleased it could operate a machine like that. It would have need of such skill. Turl got involved with the bauxite quotations through the galaxies and didn't pay any more attention until nearly nightfall. The animal had returned the blade machine and was now almost finished with the fence. It had built a fence of sorts all around the cage. Turl was puzzled until he remembered the animal saying the horses might touch the bars. Of course, it was protecting the females from a flashbang in case the horses short-circuited the bars. After another hour of studying prices, Turl got his face mask and went down to the cage area. He found that the animal had built himself a little hut from the tree branches, and now had the instruction machine and table and packs inside it, and was kindling a fire beside it. Turl hadn't totally realized or recognized that man-things could create houses. Well, no dressed timber, no stones. The man-thing got a branch burning and, some other things in its hand, went over to the cage. It had left a zigzag opening before the door bar. The horses, it could let a man-thing through, but not the horses. Turl threw the switch and cut off the juice to the bars, and he let the animal into the cage. It handed the female the burning brand, put down some other things, came out again, and got some wood and took that in. It was very uninteresting to Turl. He noted idly that the females had cleaned up the old robes, dismantled the meat drying rack, and neatened the place up. He checked their collars and leashes for the firmness of the pin to which they were tied. They shrank from him as if he were some kind of disease. It amused him. After he had pushed his animal back out and locked the cage door, from nowhere an idea hit him. Turl hastily turned on the juice again and went tearing back to his office. Throwing down his face mask, Turl yanked a huge calculator into the center of the desk. Talons rattled on the key buttons. Reports to Home Office concerning ore tonnage shipped flashed on the screen and went into the calculator, ripping through the sale price, the publications, and battering its data into the machine. Working with an intense fury, Turl calculated the Home Office values of earth ore shipped. He stared at the screen. He sat back, stunned. The operational cost of intergalactic on Earth and the current market value of the ore shipped told one incredible fact. Not only were Earth operations not losing money, but ore sold values were 500 times the operating cost. This planet was incredibly profitable. Economy wave? By the crap, Nebula for this planet could afford to pay 5, 10, or 15 times the wages and bonuses. Yet Numph had cut them. It was quite one thing for the company to make an enormous profit, but it was quite another for Numph to lie about it. Late into the night, Turl worked. He went over every report Numph had sent to Home Office in the past month. They seemed very usual, very much in order. The pay columns, however, were a little bit fishy. They listed the employee's name and grade and then simply said, usual pay for grade, in a symbol form, and under the bonuses it said, as designated. Very funny sort of accounting. One could say, of course, that this mine area was not an administration center and was short of personnel, and that the Home Office should finish the reports after all. The Home Office accounting section was not only well-staffed, but also totally automated. Here they just handed out the credits across the pay table to the employees. A lot of them couldn't write anyway, and there were no signed receipts. It was this omission that made it necessary to return bodies of workers killed. Then, about midnight, Turl found something funny, something to do with the vehicle reports. Vehicles in use for each of the 5-day work period were customarily reported by their serial number. The first oddity was that Numph was reporting vehicles in use, hardly a function for the planetary head, but Turl knew Tumph's handwriting. Suddenly Turl found a vehicle he knew was not in use. It was one of the 20 battle planes he had had returned from other mine sites. Those 20 sat outside in a nearby field, there being no room left in the garage. Yet there it was, a battle plane 3450967G. Numph had noted it in use for the last period. On report after report, Turl examined those in use listings. He noticed that they were varied in position from one to another. The sequence was different in every report. Turl smelled code. By dawning light, he had it. Using serial numbers of the countless vehicles on the planet, one could choose the last 3 digits, and by playing substitution of numbers for letters, write pretty much anything one pleased. With expanding joy, he read the first message he had decoded. It said, "No complaints here, bank difference as usual." Turl did another calculation. He was exuberant. These reports went to Knipe, Nump's nephew, in Home Office accounting. The total pay and bonuses of Earth should have been around 167 million galactic credits. Actually, no bonuses were being paid and only half of the salary. It meant that Knipe, on home planet, was reporting full pay and bonuses and was banking to the personal account of himself and Nymph close to 100 million galactic credits a year. Their own combined pay would not exceed 75,000. Their swindle was making them nearly 100 million a year. There was the evidence, the code, the incomplete accounts. Turl's office shook as he paced back and forth, hugging himself. Then he paused. How about making Nymph and Knipe cut him in? They would have to. But no. Good as he was as a security chief, Turl realized that if he could untangle the scheme, so could someone else. It was big money, but dangerous money. Knipe and Nymph stood a fair chance of failure, and if caught, they would be vaporized just out of hand. Turl wanted no part of that. So far, he was not culpable. He could not be blamed for not catching on, for it was not part of his department to do accounting. No complaints had come his way. He had written orders from them to be alert for mutiny, but no orders from anyone to police Home Office. No, Turl would be content with his own 100 million. Thank you very much. It was very smooth. He had it all worked out. It was not company or no company employees would be used. He could call it an experiment and even show he was ordered to do it. Nothing would go into company records. The last little part of it was risky, getting it to home planet. But he could even worm out of that if caught. And he wouldn't be caught. Let Nymph and Knipe have their fortune and their risk. He would preserve these records just long enough to convince Nymph if he needed to. And then he would destroy them. Oh, did he look forward to his next interview with Nymph. "I see you have acquired some more animals," said Nymph curiously the next afternoon. Jolly Turl had gotten the interview with a bit of persuasion. He was not popular with Nymph's office staff, and he definitely didn't seem very popular with Nymph. The planetary director sat there behind his upholstered desk. He was not looking at Turl, but gazing with some distaste upon the awesome mountain scenery in the distance. "Just as you authorized," says Turl, going back to being a cockney. "Humph," said Nymph. "You know, I really don't see any trace of this mutiny of yours." Turl put a cautionary paw across his own mouth bones. Nymph noticed it and turned to face him. The security chief had brought a lot of papers and some equipment with him. He now raised a warning talon to Nymph and then reached down and picked up some equipment. Nymph watched while the security chief passed a probe all over the office. Up along the curving canopy beams, between the edges of the rug, over the desk, and even under the chair of the armored chairs. Each time Nymph sought to question, Turl put up a cautionary talon. Plainly, the security chief was making sure there were no button cameras or picture recording diaphragms anywhere about. Turl looked through the canopy and examined the outside carefully. No one was around. Finally, he smiled, just to give reassurance, and sat down. "I don't like that recon drone crashing by every morning," said Nymph. "It gives me a headache." Turl made a notation. "I would change its course at once, your planet ship." "And these animals," said Nymph. "You're getting a positive zoo out there. Just this morning, Charles says you had added 6 more. Well, actually, said Turl, the project requires more than 50. Also, some machines to train them on and authorization. Absolutely not, said Nymph. It will save the company a great deal of money and increase its profits. Turl, I am not going to issue an order to vaporize these things tomorrow. I'm going to issue it today. If Home Office were to hear, it's confidential, said Turl. It's a surprise. How grateful they will be when they see their payroll and their bonuses shrink and their profits soar. Nymph frowned, feeling himself on very sure ground. Before, Turl knew the blunder he had made before. Nymph, left to his own crooked course, would have enormously increased the number of personnel brought in from the silo. Every extra employee greatly padded Nymph's pocket. I have other ways to increase our shipments, said Nymph. I am considering doubling our workforce with employees from home planet. There are plenty out of work people there. But that will reduce profits, said Turl innocently. You told me yourself that profits were a battle right now. More profit, said Nymph belligerently. And they go on half pay when they arrive. That's final. Now, these authorizations I have here, said Turl undisturbed, to train up more native indigenous work. Did you hear me? Said Nymph angrily. Oh, yes, I heard you, said Turl, smiling. My concern is for the company and for the increase of its profits. You imply mine are not, challenged Nymph. Turl laid his work papers on the table in front of him. Nymph glanced down at them. At first, the planetary director started to sweep them away with just a glancing paw. Then he sat suddenly still, frozen. His eyes stared, his paws began to tremble. He read the profit estimations. He read the circled absence of actual pay information. He read the vehicle numbers, and then he read the message. No complaints here. Bank difference as usual. Nymph looked up at Turl, staring. Frozen terror crept into his eyes. By company regulations, says Turl, I have the right to replace you. Nymph was staring at the gun in Turl's belt. His eyes were hypnotized with shock. But actually, I don't care much for administration. I concede that someone in your position, faced with growing old and with no future, might find other ways to solve his problems. Viagra. I am very understanding. Nymph's terror-filled eyes lifted to Turl's chest, waiting. The crimes of someone on the home planet are not in my duty sphere, says Turl. There was a flicker in Nymph's eyes. Incredulity? You have always been a good administrator, continued Turl. Mainly because you let other employees do exactly what they think is best and what best serves company interests. He swept up the evidence. Out of regard for you, these will be put away where none can see them. Unless something happens to me, of course. I report nothing to Home Office. I'll know nothing about this, even if you say I'll do. There will be no evidence and you won't be believed. If you get vaporized because of it, it will be entirely because of mistakes you make on other lines. They will not include me. Turl got up, followed by Nymph, stricken eyes. A huge sheaf of requisitions and order forms was laid upon Nymph's desk. For your signature, says Turl. They were blank. They were undated. They were forms from the planetary director's own office. Nymph started to say, but they're blank. You can put anything on these. Personal money, machines, mines, change operations, even trash yourself. Just a transfer off the planet. But his voice wouldn't work. And then he realized that his brain wouldn't function either. The pen was pushed between his claws. And for the next 15 minutes, Nymph signed his name over and over and over again, slowly, almost witlessly. Turl picked up the sheaf of signed blanks. He would be very sure that none of these got loose while he were not filled in. All for the good of the company, says Turl. He was smiling. He put the thick sheath back in a securely locked case, put the evidence in a big envelope, picked up his equipment. To remove you would ruin the career of a valuable employee. As your friend, I can only seek to minimize damage to the company. I am pleased to tell you that you are in no danger from me in any kind whatsoever. You must believe that. I am a faithful company employee, but I protect my friends, and I'm your friend. He gave a little bow and left. Nump sat like a dumped sack of ore, nerveless, incapable of reaction. Only one thought kept going round and round and round in his head. The security chief was an untouchable demon, a demon who, forever after, could do exactly as he wished. Nump was never thought of even trying to stop him. He was and forever would be in the complete power of Turl. He was too paralyzed to even think of warning Nipe. From here on out, Turl will be the real head of this planet, doing exactly as he pleased. It had been a good hunt, and Johnny was going back to the compound. That morning he had looked with sorrow at the dejected bearing of the two girls. What little they could do to clean up their squalid cage they had done. They had tried to put on bright faces when he talked to them through the two barricades. Patty had come out a bit more, but she hadn't laughed when he told her she could marry the king of the mountains. It was an old personal joke. She had suddenly burst into tears, and Chrissy, trying to comfort her, had begun to cry too. Something had to cheer them up, or at least keep them busy, Johnny thought. He got the horses, and with Windsplitter, stepping out, had ridden away from the compound. Dancer and the third lead horse, named Old Pork, after his habit of grunting, trailed behind. Blodgett was better. Is that a Harry Potter reject? Blodgett was better, but it would be some time before the wounded horse could run. Johnny was looking for deer. With venison to smoke and hide to tan and strip, the girls would get their minds off their worries. Some of his own guilt and bitterness dimmed as he raced across the plain, Windsplitter eager, the other two pounding along behind. The wind had whipped up his pessimism and washed it away. The illusion of freedom stimulated him. Perhaps there was hope. He had done better than one deer. He had come across, hammering down to the canyon, and found an arroyo. What the hell is that word? Arroyo? Into an Arroyo. And found himself within feet of an antelope. And shortly after, one cleaned antelope was back on Old Pork. Not a half hour later, he had gotten his deer, a young buck. With pack horses full, laden and trailing behind him, he was looking for Kinnick. What is it with these bloody words? Kinnick. Is that the horny guy from Greece? Kinnick, a wild plant that gave good flavour to venison. Weirdo. It was really too early for the berries to form, but the leaves were quite good. His attention was drawn to a humming sound far behind him. He halted, examining the sky. There it was, a tiny dot, getting bigger. It was heading either toward him or toward the compound. The horses had gotten used to machinery sounds, and there was not much to choose at the moment between the buzz overhead and the mutter of noise in a compound not 3 miles ahead of them. Johnny's curiosity turned to a feeling of unrest. Where was that object going? It was very low, not travelling very fast now. Suddenly he knew it was heading for him. There had been a row of planes in a field near the compound, 20 of them. Turl had ferried them in from all over the world, and left them out in the open. This was one of them. It was about 100 feet up, almost stopping. The roar was making the horses nervous. Johnny, he kicked Windsplitter ahead and started straight for the compound. The plane drew off, turned, and then with a shattering burst of speed dove on him. The earth before the horses erupted in explosions of dirt. Windsplitter reared and tried to spin away. Clods battered the horses. Johnny's ears ached with the explosions. He turned the horses in another direction and turned to the right. The earth erupted in a long line in front of him. Windsplitter began to plunge in terror. One of the pack horses broke loose. Johnny wheeled and began to race to the north. In front of him, the ground erupted again. He tried to get his horse to go through the hanging curtain of dust. Winspeter turned and tried to run to the south. This time the plane plunged down and settled across their path. Terrified, Winspeter reared. Johnny got him under control, eventually. Turl was just sitting in the open door of the plane, laughing. He roared, moving back and forth, pounding his chest to get his breath. With considerable trouble, Johnny got the two pack horses together. He dismounted to straighten out their pack to meet. You look so funny, says Turl, straightening his face mask. The horses were rolling their eyes, trembling, but Johnny's eyes were not rolling. Had they been blast guns, Turl would have been dead. I just wanted to show you how easy it is to stop you, just in case you ever get out of hand. Just one of those blast guns aimed at you and not in front of you would have made you a pale pink mist. Johnny had tied the pack horse lead ropes to Winspeter's neck. He stood there, soothing Winspeter with a stroking hand. I'm celebrating, says Turl. Send those horses back to the compound and get in. I don't have an air mask, says Johnny, and that interior will be breathe gas. I bought you an air mask, says Turl, reaching aside and holding it up. Get in. Johnny had Winspeter calm by now. He took hold of the horse's ear. Go to Gracie. Winspeter cast a glance at the plane, and then, glad enough, started off toward the compound, pulling the pack horses with him. Yeah, says Turl to himself. The animal did have a language with the other animals. Johnny put on the air mask and pulled himself up into the plane. Badly as it started, Johnny could not believe the sensation of flight. He was lost in a huge co-pilot seat, and the belt that was supposed to keep him in would not contract enough to do so. So he braced himself with a grip on the handhold and watched the earth race away from him. He felt all. Was this how it felt to be an eagle? Is that how the world looked from the sky? The panorama of the mountains to the west began to open in relief, and in the few moments he realized they were now higher than High Peak, seen whitely in the cold, clear air. For 15 minutes he was enthralled. They were at the height of about 4 miles. He had never realized there was so much world, or that one could feel so thrilled. Then Turl said, You can operate any of my machines, can't you, animal? Now this is no different, except that it goes in 3 dimensions, not just 2. Those controls in front of you duplicate these. Fly it. Turl's paws came off the controls. The plane immediately flopped over. Johnny was thrown against the door. The plane staggered and began a sickening dive. Johnny had not paid any attention to what Turl was doing with the controls before. There was a maze of levers and buttons. He was gripped a security belt and got himself into position to reach things. He started pushing buttons. The plane went crazy. It soared, it swooped, the ground rushed up and sped away. Turl's laughter cut above the roar, and Johnny began to realize the creature was a bit high on Cabango. Celebrating, indeed. With a steadying concentration, Johnny took the controls. He had nothing to do. He could do nothing. As on all silo equipment, everything was marked. Some of the items he didn't know, but he spotted an additional button alongside every button familiar in mining machinery. He grasped that the third set was the third dimension. The main thing he instinctively knew was not to get too close to that ground. He found a button for altitude and punched it. Although the plane was staggering, the ground began to fall away. This was too close to a win for Turl. I'll take over, he said. I got high honours as a pilot in school. Watch me land on that cloud. A ragged top puff of cloud was ahead of them. Turl punched some buttons and stopped the plane on a flat place in the mist. Trouble is, rat brain, you didn't watch what I was doing. You were too busy gawking at the scenery. But I guess if rats were meant to fly, they'd be birds. He laughed at his own joke, reached down behind his seat, and unstrapped a sealed container of Cabango. He took a chomp on it and put it back. First lesson, don't ever leave anything adrift in a plane. It'll fly around and bat your brains out. Not. The rats have any brains. He took off and made Johnny repeat the operation of landing and stopping. After the third attempt, Johnny made it without being half down in the cloud. Johnny took off and started to fly towards the mountains. Turl instantly and Johnny thought a bit fearfully, batted his hand away from the cockpit controls, and with his own hand turned the plane back. Not while I'm in it with you, growled Turl. His mood changed abruptly. Why not over the mountains, says Johnny. Turl scowled. Whenever you fly over those mountains, just make very sure you have no breath gas loose. Any place. Understood? Johnny understood. He suddenly understood a lot more than Turl had thought he did. Why are you teaching me how to fly? Says Johnny. More to distract Turl from his line of thinking than because he believed Turl would tell him anything. And he was right. Any miner has to know how to fly, says Turl. Johnny knew that wasn't true. Kerr could fly, he was sure, since Kerr had said so. But Kerr had also said their miners were only interested in going underground, not above ground. It was mid-afternoon when they landed the battle plane. Johnny had been right. It was the 20th plane. Turl inched it into the precise position. He put on his breathe mask, opened the door, and gave Johnny a shove to get out. Don't get any ideas you can start one of these things, says Turl. They require a special key to unlock the computers. He dangled a key in front of him. I'll keep this one for this plane right here beside the remote control box. He took the box out and looked at it. Yep, all switches still open. He showed Johnny the box. And no dummy wires. That's pretty good. No dummy wires. Johnny went off to round up the horses. Windsplitter had gone across to Chrissy, and the 3 horses were standing outside the wooden barrier. Patty yapped to see him. He realized they had been worried about because the horses showed up without him again. Got an antelope and a deer, called Johnny to the cage. I was a little bit delayed looking for a knick. I found some, but not very much, but they will flavour the meat. Chrissy was very pleased because she was a little bit like Gordon Ramsay. She likes fucking cooking. We can strip and smoke the meat, she called across the 2 barriers. There's plenty of ashes here. My name's Ash, and we can tan their hides like a bad little bitch. We can slap them. Johnny felt better because he's going to get his hide tanned. Anyhow, yeah. Patty called out, Johnny, there's a huge grizzly bear skin here. Did you kill it, Johnny? Yes, Johnny had killed it, but he had so sure that he had killed the wrong beast. Later that evening, when Turl came to let him, supervised, into the cage, he gave the girls their skinned meat and hides to handle. He touched them reassuringly, hiding his wince at the way the collars chafed their throats. When he came out and Turl had locked up and turned the juice back on, Turl said, I'm just an animal attendant, but I don't wire dummy wires. He threw his stack of books at Johnny before he rumbled away. Get your rat brain round these, animal. Tonight. Kerr will take up your instruction in the morning. Don't go chasing off on a rat hunt. Johnny looked at the books. He was dimly aware of getting an idea of what Turl must want from him. The books were Beginner's Flight Manual and Teleportation in Relation to Manned and Drone Flight. The latter was clearly marked Secret, not for alien race distribution. Could it be, thought Johnny, that Turl was acting well outside the business of the company? If so, it was doubly certain that he and the girls would be killed, deaded, after they have served their purpose. Poor girls. Turl would not leave witnesses around. Johnny and Kerr were engaged in ferrying mining machines and equipment to the defense base. The order to do so had come early that morning from Turl. The machinery freighter plane was parked with doors agape and ramps let down in the open field near the battle planes. A remarkably carried Zit checked off a drilling machine as it was run up to the ramp to Kerr. He raised the ramps and closed the doors. Johnny buckled himself into the co-pilot seat and Kerr slid behind the controls. The freighter lifted abruptly and spun to the west. Kerr flew low and kept the ship steady, for none of the machinery was lashed. Johnny did not even look at the ground flowing by. They had made this short trip several times. He was tried for a week and had been practicing flying all day and studying all night, and it was beginning to show. His headache, however, came from the text, teleportation in relation to manned and drone flight. The flight part of it was far less interesting than teleportation. He felt that he could grasp that. he might be able to do something to avert the fate he knew was come someday. The mathematics of the text were quite beyond him. They were silent mathematics and a long way in advance of that which he had studied. The symbols made his head spin. The history section at the start of the book was perfunctory. It simply stated that 100,000 years ago, a psychophysicist named N has entangled the riddle. Prior to this, it was thought that teleportation consisted of converting energy to matter to space and then reconverting it to another place so it would assume its natural form. But this had never been proven. N had apparently found that space could exist entirely independent of time, energy, or mass, and that all these separate things were actually separate items, only when combined did it make up the universe. Space was dependent upon 3 coordinates. When one dictated a set of space coordinates, one shifted space itself. Any energy or mass contained in that space thereupon shifted with that space shift. Although technically speaking, you'd have to add correlative coordinates to do that, because otherwise you would need 7 spatial coordinates to actually get it, and that's not including time. Anyhow, in the matter of a motor such as a freighter had, it was just an enclosed housing in which space coordinates could be changed. As the coordinates changed, the housing was forced to go along, and this gave the motor power. That explained why these planes were run on a switchboard and not thrust into the air. They didn't have to use wings or controls. Much smaller housings in a tail on each side had similar sets of coordinates fed into them to make them climb or bank. A series of coordinates were progressively fed into the main motor, and it simply went forward or backward as the house space occupied each set of coordinates in turn. Teleportation over vast distances worked the same way. Matter and energy were pinned to the space, and when it was exchanged with another space, they simply changed too, so it's leapfrogging. Thus, matter and energy would seem to disappear in one place and then reappear in another. They didn't actually change, only the space did. So you're not moving yourself, you're moving the universe. Johnny could see how Earth had been attacked. Informed of its existence, possibly from some silo station in the universe, the silos had only to fish in its coordinates. They evidently used a recorder of some kind. They cast the recorder out to test for a set of coordinates and then got it back. Looked at the pictures. If the recorder vanished, they knew they sent it into the mass of the planet. And then they just had to readjust the coordinates for a new recorder recast. In that way, they had sent the killer gas. When it dissipated, they had followed it with silos and weapons. That was how Earth had been wiped out and conquered. But it didn't tell Johnny how to reverse the process. Any silo station out there could teleport new gas or even an army to Earth at will. That was the point that was giving him the headache. "You're not very chatty," says Curl. Circling to land at the old defense base, going dead slow because of loose machinery. Tyrrell came out of it a little bit. He pointed at the bussing camera that hung around his neck. "Ah, forget it," says Curl. "What? They've only got a range of about 2 miles. He pointed to his work jacket pocket flap. A much smaller button camera with a symbol of the company was on it. It was actually serving as a real button. "Not 5 or more?" said Johnny. "Ah, crap, no," says Kerr. "The security measures of this company are a pain in the ass. There's no recorder in this plane. I checked. What the splintered asteroid are they going to do hauling this machinery over to this old defense base?" He looked down. It doesn't even look like a defense base anyway. And it didn't. It was just some buildings, not even a landing field, no bunkers that anyone could see, at least anyway. Some kind of a strange series of pointed things standing up at one end. "Tyrrell gives the orders," said Johnny, a little bit resigned. "Blast no, these weren't Tyrrell's orders. I saw them. They were signed by the head of the planet. Tyrrell was even complaining. He said he wondered whether old Nump had gone off his computers." I gave Johnny new data, but not what Curl thought. Tyrrell was covering his tracks. Was this Tyrrell's project? It made him uneasy. "This stuff," says Kerr, with a backward jerk of his head, "is supposed to be practice equipment. But for who? It's perfectly good mining equipment. Oh no, we're going to land. He sort of punched the control buttons and the freighter crept down and landed easily and level. Kerr put on his face mask. Another funny thing, there's no supply of breathe gas. And with all this stuff, just what was left in the tanks? I mean, there's nothing there. You're the only one I know that can operate these machines without breathe gas in their canopies. You can operate all these machines? It sure run your butt off. Let's get them unloaded. They spent the next hour lining the machines up in an open field near the largest building. There were drillers and flying platforms, cable readers, ore netters, blade scrapers, and a single transport truck. With the items brought in earlier and all these other loads, well, we've got over 30 machines here now. Let's prowl, says Kerr. We've been fast. What's in this big building then? It consisted only of rooms, each with bunks and lockers. There were what may have been washrooms. Kerr was prowling for loot. But broken windows, wind and snow hadn't left much to scavenge. Dust and indistinguishable debris were thick. Already being prowled was Kerr's finding. Let's look elsewhere. Kerr clumped through the building entrance for another building. Johnny saw it had been a library, but without Chinka protection, it was mainly just litter. 1,000 years of cockroaches had dined on paper. A queer broken structure that once had had 17 points. Johnny counted them. Seemed to have been some kind of monument. Kerr entered a door that was no longer there. A cross was still hanging upon the wall. What's this thing? Said Kerr. Johnny knew what it was. A church cross. He told Kerr. Funny that thing having a defense base in it. You know, I don't think this was a defense base. More like a school. Johnny looked at Kerr. The midget silo might be thought dim-witted, but he was dead on the mark. Johnny did not tell him there were signs all over the place that said United States Air Force Academy. They wandered back to the freighter. I bet we're establishing a school, says Kerr. I bet that's what it is we're doing. But who's going to be taught? Not silos. Not with no breathe gas. That's for sure. Put up the ramps, Johnny. We're going to get out of here. Johnny did, but he didn't climb up into the cockpit. He looked around for water and firewood. He had an idea he'd be camping out here soon. Yeah, there was a stream coming down from a nearby snug-capped peak, and there was plenty of firewood in the trees. He walked out and looked at the trench where the last battle had been fought against the silos. The grass was tall and waving in a lonesome-sounding wind. He climbed to the freighter cockpit, deeply troubled. At evening, when he opened the cage, Turl sounded excited. Tell your horses and your females goodbye, animal. Tomorrow at dawn, we're going on a long trip. Johnny stopped with his arms full of firewood he'd been taking in. How long? 5 days, week, it depends. Why do you want to know? I have to leave things for them, like food, dildos, batteries, a lot of things. Oh, says Turl differently. Am I going to have to stand here and wait? He made up his own mind. He locked up the cage again, turned on the juice. I'll come back later. And he rumbled off hurriedly. Well, here goes, Johnny told himself. What devilry was going to take place now? Fortunately, that day he had gotten a fat young bull. Well, hey, he swiftly went about his work. He quartered it and rolled up 2 quarters in the hide, putting it outside the door. Chrissy, put me together enough smoked meat for a week. Also, think about what you'll need for that time you're leaving. There was a trace of panic in Chrissy's voice. Just for a little while. Both girls looked apprehensive. They seemed so forlorn. And Johnny cursed him. Why am I doing German? I'll be sure to come back. And I'm doing Irish. Get busy with the food. He expected Blodge's wound. Blodge could walk now, but the turn muscled had ended her running days for her. The grazing problem for the horses was a little rough. He did not want to turn them loose, but he couldn't stake them for a week's grazing all in one spot. He finally settled it by letting them loose, but instructing Patty to call them back to the barrier a couple of times a day to talk to them. Patty promised that she would. He prepared a belt pouch with flint and tinder, cutting glass, and a few odds and ends. He folded up a complete suit of buckskins. He made a pack of these and 2 kill clubs. When Turl came back later in the evening and opened the cage door, Johnny rapidly moved in what Chrissy would need. She could smoke beef and work with hides. It would keep them busy. He took the package she had prepared. "You will be all right, Johnny?" she asked. He didn't feel like smiling, but he smiled. "I'll make it my first business in all cases. Now don't you worry. Put some of that tallow on Patty's neck. It'll help stop the chafing." Nappy rash? "Come on," says Turtle irritably outside the cage. "How'd you like that glass to cut things with?" says Johnny. Chrissy says, "It is very good, if you don't cut yourself." "Well, I'll be careful." "Oi," says Johnny to Turtle, "get out of here." Johnny gave Patty a kiss on the cheek. "Now you take good care of your sister, Patty." He put his arms around Chrissy and hugged her. "Please don't worry." "For crap, come out of the cage," says Turtle. Chrissy hand trailed down Johnny's arm. He drew away, only their fingers touching. "Be careful, Johnny." Tears were rolling down her cheeks, and down the cheeks of her face. Turtle yanked him out and banged the cage door shut behind him. Johnny closed the wooden barrier, and Turtle turned on the juice. "At dawn," says Turtle, "I want you down at the landing field ready to go. Personnel Fraser 91. Wear decent clothes and boots that won't stink up the ship. Bring an air pump and plenty of bottles and an extra mask. Is that understood, animal?" He rumbled off, practically trotting. Turtle was a busy fellow these days. The ground shake had died away. Later, Johnny picked up some wild flowers and berries in the dark and tried to throw them between the bars. But the electric current simply arced and sizzled before they could get through. It made things seem even worse. He went to bed at last, dispirited, frustrated, certain that the future was going to be very rough, if not lubricated, and if not fatal. They were aloft at last, flying just to the east of north, rising rapidly to an altitude of over 10 miles. Turtle loomed over the control panel, silent and withdrawn. Johnny sat at the co-pilot console, the seatbelt wrapped around him twice, and the air mask tending to mist. It was growing very cold in the flight cab. They were late getting off because Turtle had personally had to go over every fitting and unit of the plane, although suspicious that someone might have sabotaged it. The actual ship number was 18 digits long and only ended in 91. It was an old ship, a cast-off from some war on some other planet, and it showed its scars and dents and sears. It had a forward flight compartment like any freighter, but it was armoured and fitted with batteries of air-to-air and air-to-ground blast guns. The huge body of the plane, now empty, was fitted to carry not ore, but 50 company attack troops. There were huge benches, bins for supplies, racks for the blast rifles, and there were many, many ports, all armoured. The plane had not carried troops or even been flown for ages. Seeing that breathed gas compression would be off in the compartment, Johnny had thought it might be better to ride there, but Turtle put him in the co-pilot seat. Now he was glad. This altitude probably had little air in it, and the cold was seeping into the cab with icy fingers. Below them, the mountains and plains spread out, apparently not moving at any great speed, even though the plane was well above hypersonic. Soon Johnny knew he was looking at the top of the world. Pale green misty sea and white vastness of ice were all across the northern horizon. They were not going to cross the North Pole, but nearly. The clattering console computer was rolling itself out a tape of the successive positions. Johnny looked at it. They were turning in a curve to head more easterly. "Where are we going?" says Johnny. Turtle didn't answer for some time. Then he yanked an intergalactic mining chart off the planet and put it on the seat next to him. "You're looking at the world, animal. It's round." Johnny unfolded the chart. "I know it's round." "Where are we going?" "Well, we're not going up there," says Turtle, pointing to a town to the north. "That's all water in spite of it looking solid. Just ice. Don't ever land there, you'd freeze to death." Johnny had the chart open. Turtle had drawn a red curving line coursed from the area of departure up across the continent, then across a large island, and then down to the top of another island. Typical of a mining map, it was all about numbers and without any names. He translated rapidly in his head back to the Chinko geography. Using ancient names, the course lay up over Canada, across the top of Greenland, past Iceland, and down to the north tip of Transvestite Land. On the mind map, Scotland was 897213. After punching a new series of coordinates, Tyrrell put the ship on automatic and reached back of his seat for another container of Kerbango. He slurped some into his container cover and chewed it down. Animal, says Tyrrell, over the roar of the ship, I'm about to recruit 50 man-things. I thought we were almost gone. No, rat brain, there are some groups in various inaccessible places on the planet. Says Johnny. Having gotten them, we are going to take them back to defense base. Tyrrell looked at him and nodded. And you're going to help. If I'm going to help, maybe we better talk over how we're going to do this. Tyrrell shrugged. Simple. There's a village up in the mountains. Where you see that red circle? This is a battle plane. We just dive in with stone blast, and then we walk around, load up once we want, and then we bugger off. Johnny looked at him. No. Hostile, Tyrrell said. You promised. I know what I promised. I'm saying no, because your plan won't work. They're wearing kilts. Their balls will pop. These guns can be set to stun. They don't have to be set on ball popping. Maybe you better just tell me what these men are going to do, says Johnny. Why, you're going to train them on machines. I thought you could figure it out for yourself. Fucking rat brain. You've been ferrying the machines, so what's wrong with this plan? They won't cooperate, says Johnny. With a frown, Tyrrell studied that. Leverage. It was true that he wouldn't have leverage. We'll tell them if they don't cooperate, we'll shoot up their village for keeps. Probably, says Johnny. He looked at Tyrrell, disgusted, and laughed. It stung Tyrrell. Johnny was sitting back now, looking at the map. Johnny saw that they were avoiding a mine site located in the southwest of England. Wurzeltown, that's where I live. Wurzeltown, southwest of England. He wagered with himself that Tyrrell would come down, maybe in a wave on top of the last run into Scotland. Why won't it work, says Tyrrell. If I got to train them, you better let me walk in there and get them. Tyrrell barked with that animal. If you walk into that village, they will drill you like a sieve. Suicide. What rat brain? If you want help from me, says Johnny, giving the map back, you'll land up here on this mountain and let me walk in the last 5 miles. I don't know what you're going to do. Johnny did not want to tell him. I'll get you 50 men. With a shake of his head, Tyrrell said, "To whiskey. I didn't spend over a year training you, just had to start all over again." Then he realised he might have said too much. He looked a bit suspiciously at Johnny and thinking, this animal, he must not consider himself valuable. But fuck it, says Tyrrell. All right, animal, you can go and get yourself killed. What's for an animal, more or less? Where's the mountain? Well short of northern Scotland. Tyrrell brought down the personnel freighter on a wave top. They skimmed the grey-green water, eventually roaring up the side of a cliff, shot inland, battering the scrub and trees, and came to a halt under the shoulder of a mountain. Johnny won his own bet. Tyrrell had avoided the mine site to the south. Johnny stepped down into a different land. The barren mountain and its scrub seemed to swim in a soft mist. Everything was hazed and faintly blue. It seemed a very beautiful place, but it had dark gorges and inaccessible summits, and there was a secretness about it that, though through its softness, concealed a harsh threat. He had not realized a land could be so different from the bold mountains of his home. He had changed to a buckskin. He hung a kill club at his belt. "It's over there, about 5 miles, says Tyrrell, pointing south. Very rough terrain. Don't get any ideas about vanishing. There's a whole ocean and continent between you and your country. You'd never make it back." He took out the control box and laid it on the seat beside him. He pointed at it. "Could be," says Johnny, "that by tomorrow morning I'll come back and get you to move into the village. Don't go moving off." Tomorrow then, says Turl, I'll come down and collect 50 men. My way? If you're still alive, duck under something to avoid the stun guns. Damn fool. See you tomorrow, says Johnny, and he quickly moved off. Goodbye, rat brain. Johnny found a faint trail that went south and, alternately running and walking, wove his way through the gullies and brush and barren fields. It was not a very promising land for food. He did not start any deer, but he saw no trace of one. There was not much grazing to be had. Far off on another mountain, he thought he saw some sheep. Just a few of them, more like a small cloud than animals. He caught a glimpse of water through the scrub ahead and went up to a gully, intending to get a better view. Yes, there was an island or body of water ahead. He trotted back down the trail. Abruptly, 3 pointed stakes jabbed out of cover. He stopped. Very, very slowly, he put up his hands, palms out to show they were empty of weapons. A guttural, wheezing voice said, "Take his club, be swift now." One spear lowered, and a heavy-set youth with a black beard stepped forward and a bit fearfully yanked the club from Johnny's belt. The youth retreated around behind him and pushed him. The other spears made way. "Looks a saucy now," wheezed the voice. "Did I let him run away?" They came to a small clearing, and Johnny looked at them. There were 4, 2 with black hair and dark eyes, the third with blonde hair and blue eyes, and a bit taller than the rest, plus an old man who seemed to be in charge. Their dress was partly woven cloth and partly hides. They wore patterned skirts of some rough fabric that fell to their knees. On their heads they had bonnets. "It's a thief from the Orkney," said one. "Na, ken Orkneyman," said another. "Could be he the Swede." "But no Swede dresses so like this." "Hush, you prater," said the old one. "Look at his potion, mayhap you find the answer." Johnny laughed. "I can give you the answer," he said. They recoiled on the defensive. Then a black-haired one crept forward and looked closely in his face. "He's a Sachanach! Hear the accent?" The old man brushed the speaker aside with impatience. "Nah, the Sassenachs be dead in many countries, except for those already here. Why am I doing Irish when it's Scottish?" "Because if you want to talk like Scottish, you understand like a Pakistani." "Let's go down to the village," says Johnny. "I'm a messenger." "Ah," said the black-bearded one. "Clan Argyll? They'll want to talk for a piece." No, says the old man. "He wears no such plaid." He squared himself off in front of Johnny. "Messenger you be from whom?" "You'll fall over your backside," says Johnny, "when I tell you. So let's go down to the village. My message is for your parson or mayor." "It's the parson we be having, but you be meaning chief of the clan. Fergus, get help with them boys and make him push him along." The village sprawled on the shore of what they said was Loch Shin. It looked temporary, as though the inhabitants could easily pick up their belongings and flee to the mountainside. A great many racks stood about with fish drying upon them. A few children peeked, afraid, from behind fallen walls. No vast number of people came to watch the group enter the village, but there was a feeling of eyes watching. Here, too, the mist softened the land. The water of the loch lay placid and extended in the quiet day. They put Johnny in the front chamber of the only whole stone house apartment. It had an inner room, and the old man went in. There was considerable murmuring of voices from in there, and as Johnny waited, then a scrawny child peeked out from behind a tattered cloth curtain, its blue eyes intense. He put a hand out toward to beckon it closer, and it vanished in a flurry of curtain. There was evidently a back door, and Johnny heard it open and close several times. The murmuring in the inner room intensified. More people were coming in from the back. Sounds like painful. At length the old man came to Johnny. "He'll see you now," he said, and pointed to the inner chamber. Johnny went in. About 8 men had assembled and taken seats, all along the walls. They had spears and clubs beside them, or in their hands. Seated on a large chair against the back wall was a big, black-haired, black-bearded power of a man. He had a short skirt, that showed his bony knees, of strong legs. He wore a pair of white crossbelts pinned together at the center, with the X with a large silver badge. A bonnet sat squarely on his head, and he held a large ancient sword across his knees. Johnny knew he must be looking at the chief of the clan. Fergus looked about at his council to see if they were all there and alert. He stared at the newcomer. A messenger, said Fergus. From whom? Have you had any trouble with the monsters? Said Johnny. A shock went through the group. I take it you mean the demons, says Fergus. Would you mind telling me any trouble you have had? This threw them into an uproar. Fergus held an imperious hand. Quiet fell. Young man, says Fergus. I'm going to stop doing the accent. It is bloody ridiculous. Young man, says Fergus. Since you give us no name, as you claim to be a messenger, although you have not said from him, though I suppose you will tell us in good time, I will do you the courtesy of answering your question. He does actually write it now in phonetic English, as opposed to accented how he wrote it before. Which is bloody annoying. The chief talked with his throat and clipped off the words. Since the days of the myths, we have had nothing but trouble with the demons. The demons and the myths, they tell us of the raised cloud across the land, and all the peoples died, except the very few. I am sure you know these myths, since they are very religious, and you appear to be a politely religious man. All to the south of us died. No men dare live there. There is a fortress of the demons 500 miles to the south and west. Woohoo! And from that time and time they foray out and hunt men. They kill them without reason, without compunction. At this moment you find us in the fishing village, for the fish are running and they swim, they don't run. We sit here and work at risk. As soon as we have a little food, we shall retire further into the highlands. You hit the highlands and I put the lowlands. I be never to pay. We have always been a proud people, we of the clan Fergus, but no one can fight the demons. Now that I have answered you, please continue. I am here, says Johnny, to recruit 50 young, valiant, pretty, valiant men. They will be taught certain skills and will perform certain tasks. It will be dangerous. Many of them may die, but in the end I will fuck them all. Should God grant us fortune, and we are true to our task, we may defeat the demons and drive them from this world. It caused an explosion. The council had withdrawn into themselves at the chief's recitation of ancient history, but they had been made fearful. But the idea of someone combating the demons was so outrageous, they exploded. Johnny sat quietly until the chief thumped the chair with his sword hilt. The chief looked at the council member. You wish to speak, Angus? Aye. There is another myth. That once long ago, when the Scots were thousands, a great crusade went south, and they were crushed. That was before the demons, shouted another council member. Nobody's ever fought the demons, yelled another. A grizzled council member stood forward, and the chief recognized him as Robert the Fox. I do not deny, he said, that it would be a worthy cause. We starve in the highlands. There is little grazing for the sheep. We dare not plough and plant crops as our ancestors once did in these rocky glens, for the mist tell us demons fly through the air and have eyes, and some say they're strange by the cylinder that passes overhead, and some days is itself a demon. But I also tell you this, that this stranger clothed in what I take to be buckskin, signifying a hunter. They're not Irish. What am I doing Irish? A strangely accented speech, smiling and courteous, and no argyle, has voiced an idea that in all my long life I have never heard before. His words caused the mind to fly with sudden vision. That he can propose such a vision of daring and boldness proves that in some way he must be English. I recommend we listen. He sat down. Fergus was musing. We could not let all our young men go. Some would have to be from the Campbells, some from the Glencannons. But never mind, stranger. Tell us your name, and from whom you are a messenger. Johnny braced himself. I am Johnny Goodboy Tyler. I am from the Americas. There was a chatter. Then Robert the Fox said, Legends say there's a land of ancients where many Scots went. Then he is English, said another council member. The chief held up his hand to quiet them. That doesn't tell us from whom you're a messenger. Johnny looked calm. He didn't feel calm. I am a messenger from mankind, before we become extinct. Forever. He saw a flicker of ah in some, and a flicker of wonder in others. The chief leaned forward again. But how did you get here? I flew here. Section the bastard. The chief and the others digested this. Fuck, sir. The chief frowned and then said, in these times only the demons can fly. How did you get here from America? I own a demon. It is my bitch. He had to get Turl before the monster took off and blasted the village. The sun was arcing up perilously close to the deadline. Noon. Johnny ran uphill on the trail, his heart overworked. Bushes whipped by, stones rolled under his pounding feet. It had been a wild night of hard working morning. The clan chief had sent runners and riders thundering across the highlands to summon other chiefs. Then came from far glens and hidden caves and the mountains, bearded, kilted, cautious and suspicious enemies, many of them to one another. The chiefs of the MacDougals, Glencannons, Campbells, and many others had come. Even the chief of the Archaeals, a subdued English lord from a group to the lower hills, had come. The king of some tiny Norse colony to the east coast had strode in late. It was after the Scots went. Then he is English, to the other council member. Did I miss a bit? I'm sorry, I've missed a bit. It was after midnight when Johnny could talk to them all. He levelled with them. He explained that Turl had personal plans of his own, independent of the company, and was using his power to further his own ambitions. He told them that Turl conceived himself to be using Johnny, and that through Johnny meant to carry out his project, and that quite possibly Turl would slaughter a lot of them when he had finished with them. Johnny began to realize, as he spoke to the intent faces around the flickering council fire, that he must be dealing with some Scottish love of guile. For when he told them he had an outside chance of turning the tables and using Turl, only then did the chiefs begin to nod and smile hope. But when he told them about Chrissy, held as a hostage against his good behaviour, and that part of his own plan was to rescue her, he had them. 18 years old, skinny white blonde, fuck yeah. A streak of romanticism which had survived all their defeats and humblings welled up in their kilts. While they could agree to a long-shot objective with their minds, they rose up to the rescue of Chrissy with their hearts. What did she look like? Black eyes, corn silk hair. How was she formed? Beautiful and makes you want to comely. How did she feel? Beautiful and makes you want to comely. Crushed with despair, hardly daring to hope for rescue. They were angered by the collar, disgusted with the leash, violent from the cage. They shook their chiefly weapons in the flashing firelight and made speeches and quoted legends. I don't want to see a lot of overexcited Scottish people in miniskirts. I just don't. Beacon fires, it's a lot of homosexuals like stuff in it. Anyhow, beacon fires had been set flaming in the hills, their chiefs signaling a gathering of the clans. They sent their warlike messages until the dawn. A meadow was the assigned meeting place, and by noon the clans would be there. Questions and introductions and ceremony had detained Johnny until after 11 in the morning, and he looked up with a shock to see he had very little time indeed to get from the plane to stop Turl from committing a folly that would ruin the future. With a sharp pain in his side from the exertion, Johnny pounded up the steep, twisting trail, swift feet spurring the ground. He hardly dared take time to check the sun. He could not be sure whether Turl was keeping the appointment by a clock or by the heavens. He dreaded any moment to hear ahead of him the roar of the plane taking off, to make a lethal pass over the village. More than 5 miles, and all of it uphill, and over a very bad trail. Johnny heard the beginnings of a start-up ahead of him. He was almost there. He burst through the brush at the edge of the plateau. The plane was already beginning to rise. He yelled, waving his arms, racing forward. If he missed, all of his work would be undone. The plane hovered, feet off the ground, turning toward the village. Johnny threw his kill club the last 30 feet to strike the fuselage and attract attention. The plane settled back down. Johnny collapsed upon the ground, drawing air in loud, hoarse breaths. The roar of the plane turned off, and Turl opened the door. "Did they chase you out?" says Turl. "Well, get in there, animal. We'll go down there, carrying a proper plan." "No," says Johnny, as he crawled up into the seat, still panting. His feet were bruised from stones, and he inspected them. "It's all set. It's ready. It's done." Turl was derisive. "What? All night I see fires burning on tops of all the hills. I was sure they were roasting you for a feast." "No," says Johnny, "they lit fires calling candidates for the work group." Turl plainly did not see how this could be. "We have to be very careful," says Johnny. Turl could agree with that. "They're going to meet in the meadow about 3 miles from here." You got me to get together so we can blast them better, Turl. "We can succeed at this, but only if we do it exactly right." "You sure are wheezing down there a little bit. Tell the truth. Are they chasing you?" Johnny threw down a moccasin, and it made a loud snap. "Blast it, it's all arranged. All we have to do is finish it. There will be hundreds in that meadow. I want you to land at the upper edge, just land up there for us. I'll show you where, and then you must sit in the door of the plane and do absolutely fuck all. Nothing. Just sit there, and I will choose from the candidates. We will get them aboard and leave by tomorrow morning." "You're giving me orders," shouted Turl. "That's how it's been arranged." He was putting his moccasins back on. You must just sit there in the plane door so you can watch and make sure all goes well." "I understand," says Turl with the same grin. "You have to get me there to frighten them into submission." "Exactly," says Turl. "Can we go down there now, please? Just like a little bit." There had never been so many together within memory, Robert the Fox had said. Over 1,000 Scots, with a few English and some Norsemen, crowded the broad meadow. They had brought some food and drink, and they had brought arms just in case, and they had brought their pipers. The panorama was of coloured kilts, ponies, shifting groups of men. FYI, kilts were invented by English people and exported to Scotland. Shifting groups of men and smoke from fires, and all over lay the skirling, squilling, whine and shriek of the bagpipes. There was a momentary surge back when the plane landed on the little knoll overlooking the meadow. But on Johnny's instructions, the chiefs had briefed their people well, and when the huge Turl took his position within the open plane door, there was no unseemly panic. The man left a wide distance between the plane and themselves. However, the obvious fear Turl saw on some of the faces confirmed for him that the animal had been right. He was needed there to overawe them. Johnny kept one eye on Turl so he could not be sure that Turl's sadism would not cause some sort of incident. Over 500 young men were part of the throng. Their chiefs had already talked to them, and they were gathered now in a central group below Johnny. Johnny sat on a horse lent to him by Chief Glencannon, so he could be seen by all. He sat the mount easily, even though it had a saddle and a bridle, things Johnny had never seen before, and that he considered effete for one who never had trouble with horses. The chief and heads of groups stood with their young men. Outside of these groups and at the edge of the crowd stood pipers. A few women, some young and some old, and some older men sat on the grass where the knoll side overlooked the scene. A few children raced about, running into people's legs. Johnny began. He already knew they had been briefed. His job was made much easier by a high literacy level among these people. They had not lost the art of reading and writing, and they knew a lot of history, mainly their own myths and legends. "You all know why I'm here. I want 50 young men who are able, courageous, and strong, to go on a crusade to rid the world of the demon up there, who does not speak or understand our language. And when I ask you to look at him, shrink back in fear. Please do so." "I ain't feeling nothing," said one young man. "Just act like I tell you to. I will not for a moment believe that you or anyone else is shitting yourself. Is that okay? The young man said it was. I feel it is necessary to tell you the character of this demon so you can help me. He is a treacherous, vicious, sadistic, and devious. Yes. He lies from choice even when the truth would suffice. She was not female. When I point now, cower back and look terrified. Johnny pointed. The crowd on cue looked up at Turl on the plane and cowered back. Turl grinned behind his face mask. This was more like it. Ha ha! The mining company that conquered this planet in ages past had equipment and technology beyond those of man. Planes in the air, machines to drill the earth, gases and guns that can slaughter whole cities. Man had been deprived of his planet for these creatures. The men who volunteered to come with me will learn to use these tools, fly these planes, man those guns. Our chances are not in our favor. Many of us may die before this is through. Our race is growing fewer in numbers. In coming years we may be gone forever. But even though the odds are against us, at least let it be said that we took this small chance and tried. The crowd went into a raving, excited roar of enthusiasm. The pipes took it up and screamed. The drums pounded. Into the bagpipe players, hopefully. Into the din, Johnny shouted, "I want 50 volunteers!" All volunteered instantly, not just the 500 young men, but the whole 1,000 in the valley. When he could again be heard above the shrilling pipes and shouting voices, Johnny announced a series of tests he would give during the afternoon. The chiefs turned to the people and organized it, and Johnny dropped down from the horse. "Mon McTyler," cried the grizzled old man who had first kept Johnny, "you're a true Englishman." And Johnny found, as he assisted in straightening out the turmoil of the test, that his name had indeed changed to Johnny Good Boy Ashman. There were even some arguments as to which clan these people had originally belonged to. It was at length decided that the Ashmans had been distributed evenly amongst all the clans before they went to America. The only problem with the test was in trying to disqualify someone. Johnny had the young men, one after another, then walk a straight line and closed eyes to make sure they weren't drunk. He made them run a distance to be sure their wind was excellent. He made them look at letters at a distance to make sure their eyesight was passing. Then they could get a driving license. Only a couple of the Norsemen were as tall as Johnny, but the scattering of black beards and blonde beards was about equal. Johnny assumed that refugees from Scandinavia or the lower countries had even from Ireland, but there's no murdering inbred paedophiles left, had changed their blood over the centuries. But it certainly had not changed the hardcore ethnology of the Highlands, which had held out now against all comers and all corners and all defeats for thousands of years. In reality, with the anti-Western agenda, the Jewish thing, Scotland right now, like all European country, is run by an unelected man with a tan. And the majority of the people in charge in Scotland are brown. Back to the book. The men got tired of just being examined. Some fights broke out from complaints of the losers, and the chiefs organized competitions to settle things. The selections went well into darkness and were finally competed by firelight. But Johnny did not wind up with 50. He finished up with 83. For diplomacy, Johnny requested the chiefs to select an older man as our representative, one in whom they felt confidence. They chose Robert the Fox, as a veteran of many raids and very learned, so that made 51. Apparently it would be unseemly not to have pipers, so 2 were chosen, so they could fuck them out of the plane on the way over. And these claimed they needed a drummer. So one of these was also selected. This made 54. Then some old women, elbowed themselves to the front and demanded to know who was going to mend torn kilts, scrape hides and dry fish and care for the wounded and cook. And Johnny found himself with new arguments and elections and 5 old widows of indeterminate age but universally attested skills. This made 59. Since the chiefs had been told there was a lot of studying involved, Johnny found himself confronted by a small but determined schoolmaster who claimed it took an iron rod to make young men who had appetites only for the hunting and the women study. And why was it Irish? And the chief said he must go too. That was number 60. But the question of death had stirred up a row with the three parsons. Who would care for the souls of these young men, who also could keep them respectful? There was a further quarrel as to which of the three would be, and the lucky one drew the long straw. This made 61. Johnny had his own plan to take care of. All of those were chosen were bright, but he had to have three very bright ones, who also came somewhere near his height, his build, and could learn sign of very quickly, and who could, at a distance or over poor radio connections, look and sound vaguely like him. He found about a dozen and asked the chiefs, schoolmaster and parson, which of these were quick studies. They named the three, and that made 64. A scholarly old fellow showed up, and who lamented the fact that no one would be writing the history that would become legend. It turned out that he was the dean of literature in some sort of underground university that had been eking along for centuries now, and on the argument that he had two capable replacements, he himself and the school, and due to his age and poor health was expendable anyway, he could not be left behind by the McCashmans. Robert the Fox thought that made very necessary, so he made 65. 18 outright uncontestable ties had shown up in the contest, and the chiefs had arranged, and when it looked like blood would be spilled over it, Johnny gave in, and that made 83. He woke up Turl, who had been hitting the cabango pretty heavily since sunset, and was lying like a mountain across the plane seat. We've got 83, says Johnny. The plane takes 50 silos, 83 humans won't occupy that much space, and I don't want to take up that much weight either, really. I want to make sure you do not object to 83. Turl was foggy and sleepy. Casualty rate of such a project is high. We have to make it appear that they are training or winter when they are operating. Oh, I guess extra numbers are fine. Yeah, whatever. Why'd you wake me up for a silly question like that, animal? And he went back to sleep. Johnny had culled another piece of Turl's project from this. Up to now, he hadn't had any real hard data on Turl's plans. Praise all for Bango, thought Johnny as he went off. He had the historian draw. I've still got the vision of 1,000 adult men in miniskirts. It's just disturbing. He had the historian draw up the roster of the Anguses and Duncans and all the parades of names and sent them off to the night to hasten pell-mell to their homes and get heavy and light clothing and sleeping blankets, personal gear, and a few days' worth of food to tide them over until they could round up cattle. They must be back at dawn, and those who didn't have them borrowed horses. For in some cases, it was a long ride both ways. Yeah, baby. Johnny had the final meeting with the chiefs. We have caused quite a row up here in the Highlands, and although the local mine site is 500 miles away, it would be a good thing now for your people to be quiet and undemonstrative for the coming year. The English lord thought that was a very good idea. The chiefs agreed to it. There is a distinct possibility, said Johnny, that we will fail, and that I will never see you again, and the group will be killed, you mount-depressive bastard. They brushed this off. Brave men always risk death, didn't they? Do this by everybody, motorbike. And don't blame Johnny McCashman. The bad thing would not be to try. That would be what couldn't be forgiven. In the midnight chill, Johnny talked to those who had not been chosen, thinking he would lead to disappointment here, but he found the chiefs had already told them that when the mission succeeded, they would be a recovery corps in charge of policing and reorganizing England, Scandinavia, Russia, Africa, and China. And they were China, 100 million dying every year from the COVID. They're calling it white lung. And they were already scheduling study, training, and organizing to do that for the end of next year. And the non-chosen were wild with enthusiasm. Fergus was spokesman as he calmly outlined it to Johnny. It worked on a clan system, of course. My God, Johnny Gate, these Scots thought big. Not from their bloody kilts. Don't fret, McTaylor. We're behind you. Johnny, exhausted, stretched out under the fuselage of the freighter, wrapped in a woolen blanket hand-woven in a tartan of Clanfergus. He fell into a hopeful sleep. For the first time since the death of his father, he did not feel alone.